Hi, I'm Melissa George with The Mindful Heart. Today's story begins before the outbreak of the American Revolution. England was deep in debt from a war they fought defending their colonies in America. And King George III thought these colonies should help pay back that debt. So in 1765, England's lawmakers, who were mostly friends of the king, passed a law called the Stamp Act. This required the colonists to buy stamps to put upon their newspapers and their legal documents. The king thought the tax was fair because it would affect all of the colonists, but some of the colonists did not agree. They thought England had fought the last war against France to help itself, and they were willing to pay for their defense, but they wanted the king to ask them for a specific sum, and then they would raise it through their elected representatives. They strongly objected to any English tax. And here appeared the famous phrase, "No taxation without representation." So Patrick Henry was one of many who were willing to risk everything in their earnest struggle against the tyrannical schemes of King George. But before I tell you what he did, let me tell you a little bit about him. Patrick Henry was born in 1736 in Virginia. His father was a very smart lawyer, and his mother belonged to a fine old Welsh family. Patrick was a careless, happy country boy. He was not dedicated to his schoolwork. Books were far less interesting to him than was his gun and his fishing pole. With these, he delighted to wander through the woods searching for game, or to sit on the bank of a stream fishing for hours. And when these out-of-door sports failed, he found joy at home with his violin. He never attended college, rather his father taught him. And with his mother, he attended church services where traveling preachers would give lively sermons that were unique in style for the time. Their words were common language, but their passionate messages spoke to the listeners' hearts. When he was 15 years old, his father hired him to work at a country store, where he remained for just a year. He then began a store for himself, but he gave it so little attention that it soon failed. He next tried farming and failed. Then he tried storekeeping again and failed again. He was now married and he had no career or any way to make a living. He hastily decided to try law, and after a short study, he applied to be a lawyer. Although he had much difficulty in passing the exam, he had at last found work that he was successful at. And he did well in his law practice. But we must skip over that part of the story so that we may go with him to Williamsburg, where Patrick Henry meets up with the Stamp Act. He went there in 1765, soon after the Stamp Act was passed, to attend a session of the Virginia House of Burgesses, of which he had been elected a member. There was great excitement in Williamsburg, and it was a time of grave doubt and confusion. What should be done about this Stamp Act? Should the people of Virginia submit to it and say nothing? Or should they urge the Parliament to repeal it? Or should they cry out against it in open defiance? Most of the members were wealthy planters, men of dignity and influence. These men spoke of England as the mother of the colonies, and they were so loyal in their attachment that the idea of war was hateful, and the thought of separation from England, they could not even entertain it, not a moment. But Patrick Henry was eager for prompt and decisive action. Having hastily written a series of resolutions, he rose and offered them to the assembly. One of these suggestions declared that the sole right and power of laying taxes in the colony belonged to the General Assembly. A hot debate followed, in the course of which Patrick Henry, ablaze with indignation, arose and addressed the body. His speech closed with these thrilling words: "Caesar had Brutus, Charles I his Cromwell, and George III. Treason! Treason!" shouted voices from the stormy assembly. Pausing a moment in a fearless attitude, the young orator calmly added, "If this be treason, make the most of it." And the resolutions were passed. It was a great triumph for the young orator, who now became the idol of the people and the people's champion. The note of defiance sounded by Patrick Henry at this time vibrated throughout all of America, and encouraged the colonists to unite against the oppressive taxation imposed upon them. In the 10 years following the passage of the Stamp Act and Patrick Henry's first treasonous speech, events in America moved rapidly, and it was later in 1775 in Richmond, Virginia, that Patrick Henry threw down the gauntlet to King George and declared war on Great Britain. It was at the Second Revolutionary Convention of Virginia. They were assembled in an old church on a hill in Richmond. The question before the assembly was whether Virginia should vote for peace or for war. All throughout the colonies there was talk of resistance, and from Massachusetts to Charleston, military companies were being organized. But prudence was keeping men back from aggressive action. Some of them argued that war with Great Britain might come, but maybe it could be prevented. "May come?" exclaimed Patrick Henry. "May come? It has come." And then, rising in his place in that old church, he broke out into that famous speech that began calmly and courteously and with dignity, but moved quickly into a fervent appeal for union in resistance. He said, "Besides, sir, we shall not fight our battles alone. There is a just God who presides over the destinies of nations, and he will raise up friends to fight our battles for us. The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone. It is to the vigilant, the active, and the brave. It is now too late to retire from the contest." That wonderful speech, and its famous ending, "I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death," that has lived in men's memories and hearts for over 100 years. And Patrick Henry eventually retired from public life. He spent his later years in peaceful pursuits, probably fishing and hunting at his farm at Red Hill. And that is the story of the greatest orator in the history of our nation. Could you imagine a man with so many failures could so dramatically change the course of history? I'm Melissa George, and this is The Mindful Heart.